to the idea we're going to have an hour before lunch and an hour after lunch, but I thought this was a very useful getting to know one another. And what we're going to do after lunch is also getting to know you exercise, but it will be something different. Rather than speaking in terms of biographies, we'll simply express our ideas and then see how the ideas fit together. So, what we're going to do is something called a facilitated conversation. What I'm going to do right now is talk for 5 minutes or so, telling you what we're going to do after lunch. Then we'll break for lunch, and then we'll come back and do the exercise. And in this facilitated conversation, what you will do is you will write down on your tablets and these other pieces of paper, and using a felt pen, one of these things, so that you can see. I'm not sure I have enough for everybody, so you might have to share the paper. Write down on a card some ideas that you have about the subject of academic globalization and cross-cultural communication. Now, this is one of Najib's great ideas. He's wonderful at bringing people together and conducting these conversations. And my understanding of what he has in mind is to say, academic globalization is happening because of transportation and communication. That means you can close it and start. So why don't you start writing down your thoughts? Now, try to do it in the form adjective, adjective, noun, and write big and fill up the whole half page so that the people at the back of the room can read what you write. Yes? Ready? Okay. So write big because people at the back of the room have to be able to see it. And if you do adjective, adjective, noun, in other words, don't write a sentence. And don't put more than one idea on a card. One idea per card, big letters, portrait style, landscape style. And as you get them, just pass them this way. I told you before lunch what we were going to do. And then we did the brainstorming. That's what you're doing by writing them down. Then we cluster them. That's what we're going to do next. And then we're going to name each cluster. And then we're going to ask, is that everything? What did we forget? Okay, so this is the method that we're using. Okay. Okay, let's see what we've got.
Social mobility, social pretending next to it. Having to do with stratification, interdisciplinary globalization. Oh, yeah.
Okay. All right, let's see what we've got. Well, here we have clearly a cluster again. Speaking different languages, multiple mother tongues, language barriers. There's also this notion of lack of trust, foreign cultures, bandwidth, slow network, IT infrastructure, writing skills is a challenge, limited funding in some countries. I'd say it's in every country, hasn't it? Have you ever seen a country that has too much money? Social stratification in interdisciplinary. But clearly there's there's a lack of equipment in the less developed countries. Okay, varying levels of existing knowledge, learning ecosystem, disingenuous agenda. I'm not sure what's meant by that. Does that mean the authorities aren't being honest? What is that? Disingenuous agenda. What's that mean? There we go. Disciplinary evaluations. So the universities are set up to evaluate students on the basis of a discipline as opposed to general knowledge. Is that what's meant? Okay. IT standards for learning, education, and training. Is that a challenge or an opportunity? That is, do we need standards, or the standards are an obstacle? What is being said there?
Which one are you on?
IT standards for learning, education, and training.
Yeah, it's a challenge because when we produce such standards, we want to make sure that at a global scale, we're taking everybody's perspective into account. And that's a challenge number one. The second challenge is, okay, do we have the right roadmap for standardization? Are we producing the standards that's actually market relevant and needed by the educational system?
Okay, so you need international standards.
Right.
For learning, education, training. Okay, good. Now, educational heritages, does that mean that different countries have different educational histories, cultures?
Exactly.
Okay.
And every culture and every country has their own educational heritages and sub-heritages. What we try to do when we're producing international standards is to protect those educational heritages. In other words, don't make the standards too restrictive so that you can't implement information technology standards without taking away those educational heritages. So they're very valuable. And the value that SC36 saw in this was, if you want to understand from a cultural perspective the way that culture thinks, their diverse thought processes from your culture, you have to understand how they derive that thought process, and that's part of the educational heritage. And we have to protect educational heritages while we do this globalization of academics.
So what would be a good example of a standard of that kind that would be useful?
It's not a standard in itself, but what we do is we create the standards, but as we're creating them, we have discussions will it affect educational heritages. In other words, will it chop off or prevent an educational heritage from actually being formed through the information technology? Now, you can look at commonalities, and a good commonality that we saw was the one-room schoolhouse. Every culture throughout the world has always had that one-room schoolhouse, but even the way they function is slightly different. So that when we come up with the IT standards for the modern-day one-room schoolhouse, which is usually learning environments that are formed by schools, universities, or even by the individual, can those same educational heritages from the initial one-room schoolhouse still exist in the digital age? And believe me, there's a lot of philosophical discussions in the standards committee on just that subject. And it's discussed no matter what standard we're working on. We've published over 40 international standards, and I can guarantee you each standard was discussed in the context of educational heritage and the preservation. It's very important, and it forms a good commonality for all. We're going to do this, but we're going to protect what we have.
But I guess the other test is, have those standards been adopted for implementation?
I would say the majority of the SC36 standards have been adopted. The ones that were recently published, they're just out there. We don't have any metrics on them. If we find that a lot of countries aren't adopting our international standards, we immediately launch studies to find out why. Did we miss something? Is there something better? We're always on guard to make sure that what we're producing is market and culturally relevant on a global scale. not just for one country or another.
Okay, let's look at this and see where we're going to go then. This, by the way, is called a sticky wall. If you have any interest in getting one, you can write to that address, the Institute of Cultural Affairs. It's just a piece of nylon, and you know the stickum that you have on Post-it notes? This is the same thing. It comes in a can, you just spray it on. And before this was developed, people used to use masking tape, little loops, and you stick it on. So this is just an improvement on that. If you don't have it, just use loops and masking tape. Okay. So let's see what we've got. So speaking different languages, foreign cultures, lack of trust, fear of terror effects. I think those go together. Bandwidth, limited funding, educational levels and writing skills are an obstacle. Disciplinary, high-quality journals. If there's a focus on narrowness, I think that's what that means. This may go with disciplinary gatekeepers. High internet costs, digital divide seems to go together. Educational heritage, communication between people of different educational levels. Varying levels of existing knowledge. IT standards. We need international IT standards. Disciplinary evaluations. I guess that goes here. Communication between people of different educational. Lacks human relation. Not quite sure where to put that. Now, what does this mean? Tell to dictionary communication?
TEL stands for Technology Enhanced Language Learning. So I'm English teacher, so I like to use technology to improve our learners, students, about communications. I think technology is very developed rapidly, so we should enhance my student or the learner, our learner, especially to communicate with the globalization.
Okay, so you're talking about using technology to help people learn languages? Yeah, okay. So that's an opportunity then. Global versus national, what has been there? This is a tension, or is that an opportunity?
Sometimes we lose the focus on national interest, and for example, as a researcher, I am writing and publishing articles, books in English, but in the same time, my national auditorium needs information in national language, and that is why
Oh, I see.
it's
So
a pity.
Okay, I get it. But how can we say that succinctly?
If you allow me, I would like to add something to what you said, if you allow me. Local versus universal knowledge. Because developing countries need to solve local problems, which needs to discover local knowledge. Any paper written in that sense would not be accepted by reviewers because has no universal knowledge.
Yeah.
So I'm going to use a strong word here, and I ask for your apology, but I'm going to use it. In the developing country, we imposed ourselves a cultural colonialism, because we have to write paper to reviewers that are looking for universal knowledge. They don't care about the local knowledge that has been created in order to solve a local necessity. If you allow me to add to your.
Thank you.
Okay, good.
Sir, excuse me. I think what you said really mattered because when I was reviewing one Sage publication, I reviewed publication from Sage, and they randomly sent papers out. But fortunately, they sent paper to me, and that paper was a Nigerian person who wrote it. And then I looked in the paper, there was nothing, like you said, universal example. If that paper had gone to somebody else, it would be totally condemned and not accepted. But I had to write and give suggestions. I didn't condemn people, say, please find additional examples that will cover global unit and everything and resubmit. You know, so that was, something
I've been
opened
reading
my
that
eyes.
for 4 years, especially when I was dean of research in my university. There is no way to convince disciplinary researcher about what I just said.
Yeah.
This is why I use the word, we are imposing self for ourselves, intellectual colonialism, which is the word I used in Spanish when I was the dean. No one cared, even the people that agreed with me,
Yeah.
because they wanted to get promoted. And then in this conference, I felt that this situation again. I was telling him the first day informally that we found that the percentage of acceptances that we had from our reviewers was the lowest one in 20 years. So the first thing that I thought, since they are the same reviewers, we got more quantity, less quality. So that's what I thought. So I started reviewing some of the papers that we don't accept. Almost all of them were related to local necessities. So even myself, after 4 years being alert about that kind of situation, I felt in this intellectual hole, even after 4 years.
If I can make a comment on what you're saying and what you said, that's actually counterproductive to an emerging global society that we're seeing. And here's why. A creative inventor, innovator, doesn't just think outside of the box. They think in multiple boxes at once. And those multiple boxes are boxes of knowledge.
Yep.
And here in the United States, we have the same. Clear only if known. If I don't know about knowledge that exists at a subcultural level that's very local, I have no idea of that knowledge. But that's not to say if I had that knowledge, I couldn't weave it into other boxes of knowledge to create something new. And that has to change.
The
We
thing
have
is
to
worse
make
than what you are
knowledge.
saying. Even if you have this knowledge, and you are from Venezuela, and you have the knowledge, and I am an author from Venezuela solving the Venezuelan problem, even you as Venezuelan would refuse my paper.
One might look at this from a statistical and logical point of view. Russell can help me on this, because he's the mathematician aspect of it. I'm thinking of in terms of the induction and deduction stuff. Now, if I wanted to get an idea of what reality is, I live in the clouds, I'm the one who does that. I want to get data points in order to get an idea of what reality is. Every one of you has a perspective. Hopefully every one of you is different from the next. The more different you are, the better it is. The more I go out there, the better that is. In order for me to get an idea, like you're saying, like the invention stuff, I deal with that every day. I want to find out from how many different data points, sampling, there we go. I want a wide sample. I think of the interdisciplinary perspective from a statistical perspective. There we go. We need a coffee real quick too. And so what I want to do is get as many different samples as possible. I take all those samples, then I can put together what this looks like. So any perspective that I have, any subject matter, and see, I kind of had the problem with the universal, meaning like the universal. Universal in what aspect? But whatever universal I want to identify, I want as many data points, as wide a sample. We use a statistical table, random numbers, whatever it is, in order to get an idea of what that whole is. That's what the universal is. That's what people are missing. That's why they, see, I don't see how you can avoid interdisciplinary. I don't see how you can avoid in order to get that sample. That's where I'm coming from, partly.
If I can add on to this discussion just a little bit, if we look at localized problems and localized vocabularies for the solution to those problems, you're going to find that that localized vocabulary doesn't translate very well into other languages, because there's nothing to say exists in English that might exist in Kenyan to describe a concept. So how do we actually handle that to where a good concept exists, but there's no translation into another language? How can another person understand that? And that's something I've been grappling with for years, especially in the international. The only thing we came up with is you might not have a word for that concept, but you might have a description that's close, but still, that's not exactly the same. Extend that a little bit to an IT system. How is an IT system supposed to translate in different languages, different concepts that are important, not only for the human, but for the other IT systems that's actually dynamically forming to create what I call a digital ecosystem for learning, education, and training. As a hint, we're looking at what's called Galish dictionaries. And Galish dictionaries are meant for IT systems, but they can be used for humans too. But that's a very big problem on trying to translate these concepts into different languages. And basically what you're doing is translating those concepts across cultures. Because languages usually express the culture. Yes. But that's a big problem that I'm still seeing today and has to get solved somehow.
Okay, let me suggest that we look at this for a moment. I think I've come up with a few clusters. And we're moving from clustering in the direction of naming. So what I want you to think about is what is the basic idea in the cluster, and we'll continue to cluster. Okay, here we have different languages, disciplinary gatekeepers, disciplinary high-quality journals, there's academic boundaries in a sense, high internet costs, the digital divide, educational heritages in different countries, communication between people in different educational levels, varying levels of existing knowledge, disciplinary evaluations, maybe that's here more. Educational levels are low some places, writing skills are low. Maybe these things go over here. Bandwidth challenges, slow network infrastructure, foreign cultures, lack of trust, limited funding in some countries. Not sure where to put that one. Learning system ecosystem challenges. That sounds like it might be here. Disciplinary gatekeepers. Disingenuous agenda, I'm still not sure what that means. I'm not sure where to put those. Okay. So here, educational heritage has some positive features. In other words, some countries have very well developed educational systems. Learning management systems, constraints of learning management systems, for-profit learning institutions. I'm not sure if those go together.
They don't go together.
They don't go together.
I have two of them, they don't go together. They're
Okay, well, those-
positive and negative, you know, they've got challenges and they've got opportunities, so.
Okay,
But the
well, these
learning
two-
management systems are what we have to do our online courses.
Okay,
Yeah,
oh, I see, that's
Okay.
necessary for online courses.
yes.
Okay, and this one goes here. For-profit learning institutions, educational heritages. I'm not sure if those go together either. So globalization is creating competition among higher educational institutions, which can be good and bad. Technically enhanced language learning, where does that go? Is that related to learning management systems?
No.
Let's find if that's related. Okay, mathematics as a universal language is an opportunity. IT standards aid communication sometimes. Low cost is an advantage. One of the obvious ones is easily accessible knowledge, open sources, databases. Then we have learning ecosystems, ability to network, intercultural opportunities for sure, learning to collaborate, that tends to come out of it. What is this one? Learning ecosystems.
I put it with that technology one that you put over there by itself. You had one up there that was kind of like technology enabled with learning or something. You were discussing it about a minute ago.
This one here, IT standards, aid communication.
Lower left, I think.
Technology and language.
Yeah, technology enhanced.
Oh, technology enhanced language learning.
Yeah, that's part, could be part of the digital learning ecosystem.
Okay. Where did that one go?
Oh, it's in your hand.
Thank you. Stereotypes equal references.
Yes.
What's this mean?
I see it as a challenge and as an opportunity. The cultural science can answer it very well. We are used to the past 20 years in journalism, in media, and communication. We are following the concept from Walter Lippmann on the pictures in our heads. And we see stereotypes or the literature let us to believe that stereotypes are bad, are prejudice, or something that is ready and you cannot change. The cultural science brings it as an opportunity if you understand the stereotypes are reference to let us be understandable and to understand the other. So I wrote also agreements and you took it out, but it means we have to make agreements to see how we will understand each other better. And the stereotypes make it possible. But if you open our minds to understand it as from this point of view, to understand that will bring us to an intercultural communication field. And it's new, it's something very new that we are trying to develop, because when we say a stereotype, oh no, I don't want to talk about it, because it's something that puts us in a jail. But if you understand, then you can communicate, a local communication will be easy, because this reference, we need it.
Yeah, I think I get the idea. So, and it's very profound and subtle and it's fundamental and basic. So in a sense, we need agreements on how to communicate, right?
Yes.
And we're going to end up using stereotypes whether we're aware of it or not. So we can renegotiate the stereotypes and reach different agreements, yes?
Yes, and also say, I'm not able to understand you like you are to be understandable. It's also freedom
Right.
to talk about something or not.
Do you find it helpful to say, what do you mean when you say X? And you get a definition behind it, because very often the meanings will be different in different disciplines, different cultures.
Yes.
Okay. So
Sometimes
that's a
different.
useful question to be ready to ask. What do you mean when you say that? Okay. Okay.
I just thought of something. Ralph and Jules Ayer wrote a work called Language, Truth, and Logic. Now this, what you say, is super critical, but almost has an infinite regress, and I'll explain how. All right, I'm going to talk about this can. What do you mean by a can? Well, a can is a container. Okay, fine. Well, what's a container? You see where I'm going with this. And so what Jules Ayer was saying is that language is, he called it a closed system, and obviously it's changing. So what happens, you're in this web, and you go from here to here. Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I mean by that. Well, what do you mean by that? You see, so you go forever in this loop, more than a loop, in a web. So maybe we ought to think of not so much what does that word or this word mean, but there's something beyond that. I don't know what it is, but you have to have a meta-analysis of the word. Jumping back from the web somehow, saying we'll get in that trap. And then it's like the meaning of meaning, something like that. Now, I don't know where I'm going with this, but it's certainly not going to be sufficient to simply talk about what do you mean by this word, because that's how these midnight discussions get started. They last until 3 in the morning or 8 in the morning or whatever. Well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by like when you go round and round and round and you get this morass? But there's something else above that we have to ask. I'm not sure what the question is, but we have to get out of that way.
Jeremy, to implement what you are saying, if I understood you, you need to remove from the American university what is called political correctness.
That's it.
Because that's the way they are trying, you know, to limit your kind of thinking.
See, this-
Political correctness.
And this gets us
So how you remove that from the American university?
so you get to some
It's
larger
not that
issues.
easy.
And ideology and systems, this gets right more into that meta-analysis. And then what are the parameters for establishing that ideology as a system? And then this is what we're talking about, for example, if you have Ayer's web, that is a system, you want to make it closed, obviously it isn't. Or you can have the parameters that allow words in and out of that web. And that's what you're talking about, the political right. And that's what we got to look at, instead of from a meta-analysis, looking at those parameters. And you're looking at ideology. This is a very ideological country. And so what do you allow, what is the ideology, what do you allow in and out of that, how do you get established, and all those other issues. But that's, you raise an interesting issue in terms of a micro-analysis about what is the meaning, but then what is the meaning of meaning and how it's established.
You can apply that, in your university you can apply that, but I don't see how we can apply it to the American university, because the political correctness would not allow us.
We're not going to survive anyway.
But above and beyond this argument, what about when other languages come into place? And we already determined that there are, in other languages, there aren't words for different things, or that, I mean, we wouldn't call this a suitcase, we would call it a box. But we learned this morning that a box is a suitcase. So we've got much bigger issues than just thinking about it.
Well, like in Spanish, I know this is kind of very interesting, we use Spanish. And we have, and I'm not sure of this, whether it's just as scientific as English or not. They say that English is more scientific, but in Spanish, we seem, you know, we seem to have more of a leeway on how to use a word. And so what you've got to do, I would argue and see that Spanish is more contextual in English.
Jeremy, I don't agree with you. I think that this is not a problem of language or just a language. It's a problem of the academic culture in the United States. And it's limited to the academic world in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
It's the academic culture in the United States.
Well,
It's not just a problem of language.
well, 50% of all
It's the
adults.
academic culture here that is being taught to the students. The political correctness. That you cannot say anything
That's right.
that someone would not like you to say.
You're dealing with another problem.
So it's another, this is another cultural problem that the United States has to face if they want to be effective in academic organization.
All right, but here's one for you, and I'll bring this up Friday, but this is a preview, it's an advertisement. 50% of all U.S. adults are functionally illiterate. That means they're reading below the 8th grade level. It's called the Literacy Project Foundation. They are illiterate. They can barely read the words on a bloody beer can. 50% of all U.S. adults. Now how the hell can you have critical thinking or much of anything else with that? 25% of all U.S. adults think the sun orbits the earth. That's National Science Foundation last year. See, we're an exceptional country. 50% of all U.S. adults think that antibiotics are effective against viruses. Okay. Now we talk about critical thinking, intercultural language and stuff like this. Deal with that.
This is
I don't know how you do it.
I see the problem is more than what you are saying.
Oh yeah, I'm sure it is.
Because I can understand that in all the American citizens. What I cannot understand, maybe because I am stupid, I cannot understand how the academic world in the United States has, this kind of limitation to the way
ideology. Look, Najee, you should go back to Father
So
Cobb.
the problem is not what you are saying, the problem is in the academic world.
I know, but go back into academia, how academia in many ways acquiesced to McCarthyism and stuff like that. It's just like Nazi Germany. The academics sat back and let it all happen. That's kind of how it developed.
Let's hear from the back row.
Sorry about that.
We appreciate the contribution. I'd like to suggest an alternative analysis that starts with the notion that actually I think you have problems. It's not just colonialism. It's any social group that you get into has customs. They have standard procedures. They have power relationships, and they have dialects. A very interesting analysis of this was Umberto Eco's Kant and the Platypus. It's a nice book of essays about the difficulties with classification, including camels, including platypuses, and including the kind of language that we use between groups and the power relations. I don't know of any way to get out of it. I think the power relations are intrinsically part of human organization. Now, as far as how this affects our ability to discuss and derive meaning, Eco says, well, you have to develop some way of communicating between members of the group so they'll understand each other. How do you tell whether you can understand things? And at that point, I'd like to suggest that there may be some mathematical help in what's known as concept analysis. Concept lattices, in which what you do is you take a set of objects and you take attributes that you might associate with the objects, and you then attempt to develop functional definitions. What that means is that you have to do the kind of things biologists would use in a taxonomy, and that is that you classify the things, and you play the Sesame Street game in which the attributes are used to play the game. Which of these things is not like the other? You can actually use mathematics. It's called concept lattices. It's done by abstract algebraists and related strange beings. And you can actually have an algorithm in which you can take and define subsets of the attributes that classify things, and you can actually follow from something that has no selected attributes to ones that has the largest number of selections, and you can actually get down to the point of selecting things. I think what that means is that you need, having been through some of these standardization meetings, where everyone sits around and says, well, no, I think the wordsmithing for this should be that. And someone else says, no, I think we need some other words. I think what you need to do is get to the point where you can actually test, like, as you would in a taxonomy with biology, does this thing belong to this category or that category? And it's only when you get to that point that you have some way of non-verbally testing that you actually have it. And I'd also insist on standards. Anybody proposing a definition has to come up with 3 examples of things that fit the definition and at least one that doesn't. Things that look similar.
I really like that last comment. One other, and then let me wrap it up.
Okay, and I'm in full agreement with you on the concept classes. By the way, there are standards out there for concept classes. It's out of ISO, IEC, JTC 1SE 32. They've got like 4 different standards on concept classes.
At least in 2
We're a full
vocabularies.
believer in concept
Is
classes.
this basically, I think of porphyry tree going back to the 1550s. And this seems, the porphyry tree seems to have been that kind of a thing where you,
I have no background with porphyry trees.
yeah, but it's very similar to kind of like that one. That they-
Let me finish my comment on his wood. There's one other thing you have to take into account, especially in human communications. You have to take into account what's called a meta perspective or a shared perspective. Now, long ago, there was a doctor by the name of Fishman that wrote a few papers on that in part of the book. And what that's doing is looking at the attitudes, beliefs, and value systems about an object. And those are 3 important parameters that I think are being missing, even in the concept classes. Because you got to make sure that for a meta perspective or shared perspective, you have similar or close to attitude, belief, and value systems for something. And like Dr. Callis is saying, in the United States, we're a little bit more. Our attitude, belief, and value systems on some ideological things have really worked, in my estimation. But in other countries, it's not as good. But can we still gain a meta perspective just through understanding the differences in attitude, belief, and value systems? In my experience, we can. You don't have to adopt them, just understand them.
I think this has been a very interesting conversation, and we're out of time in terms of the calendar. So let me just.
I'm gonna just an example of what he said. Dr. Blair approached me about 3 conferences ago and told me, I disagree with you with all what you are saying. There is nothing I can agree with you. I said, let's make a debate on that. Let's take a plenary session and make a debate. And since then, even I still disagree with her, I learned a lot from her, because the differences that you are saying, when you can get the differences, even if you are not convinced, you learn. It's the best source of learning is differences. And this is what we have in different cultures. We have a mind of learning sources which are our differences.
Let me just conclude with one question, and that is, does this exercise of drawing out ideas from people and discussing them and clustering them seem useful to you? And yes, no, how would you use it, etc.? Any comments on that?
Just one thing, because we were talking about a lot of challenges, but I would like to come up with another opportunity that I don't see very clearly there. How about gender diversity as an opportunity in order to get the potential of the whole human capital in all institutions. I think it's very important because if we want a global university system, we need to involve all the human capital, and that means women and men.
Now, are you saying that that's easier?
I think that there are structural barriers that are challenging that thing. For example, unconscious bias, bias on the decision makers.
So globalization tends to promote gender diversity?
I think that if the institutions take a policy in order, and it make it global, like programs in order to enhance the participation of women and men and to get as a global principle, it can help.
Is there anything that we really missed, like gender diversity in our discussion?
Generational, we have generational diversity also.
Okay, I would accept that if we try to find the differences between what is conceived as gender diversity in different cultures. So that would be a learning source, not just gender diversity, but the differences in the culture about gender diversity.
I think we're missing cost. I don't know if it's a problem outside of the
Yeah.
United States, but I know that here, universities are becoming more and more available to the very rich and the very poor. Those who can afford to pay and those who can't afford, therefore get substantial financial aid. And in the middle are those who can't go.
Well, I want to thank you for your participation. I found this quite interesting and enjoyable, and I think we have a 3D.
Is there a way that some of us can have that information somewhere?
I'll take it.
Okay.